Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku had Spider-Man, Wolverine, and Black Panther's powers. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The chalk dust was a ghost in the air, catching the afternoon sunbeams that sliced through the windows of Aldera Junior High. It settled on worn-out desks, on the tired spines of textbooks, and on the unruly green-black curls of Izuku Midoriya. He was hunched over his notebook, the pen a blur of motion, his muttering a low, constant hum that had long ago become background noise to his classmates. If Kamui Woods combines his lacquered chain prison with a watertight hero's quirk, could the wood gain rapid growth properties? The tensile strength would increase exponentially, but would it compromise flexibility? Maybe it depends on the cellular absorption rate. Alright, settle down, you third years, the teacher drawled, slapping a stack of papers onto his lectern with a puff of chalk-scented air. It's time to start thinking seriously about your futures. I'd hand out these career aptitude tests, but... He snatched the papers and tossed them into the air with a theatrical grin. Why bother? I know you all want to be heroes, the room erupted. Quirks flared in a chaotic, celebratory display. A girl elongated her fingers like rubbery tendrils, a boy popped his eyeballs out of their sockets, and another hardened his skin into shimmering rock. It was a symphony of genetic potential, a vibrant tapestry of power. Izuku was the single gray thread in that tapestry. He offered a small, hesitant smile and raised his hand a fraction of an inch, a gesture of solidarity he didn't feel entitled to. Yes, you've all got impressive quirks, the teacher said, trying to regain a semblance of control. But no using them in school. You know the rules. Hey, teach! A voice, sharp and crackling like popping embers, cut through the noise. Don't lump me in with these losers. Katsuki Bakugo sat with his feet propped on his desk, a lazy, arrogant smirk plastered on his face. Smoke curled from his palms, not from anger, but from sheer, simmering confidence. I'm the real deal. The rest of these rejects will be lucky to end up as sidekicks to some D-lister. The class turned on him, a chorus of indignant shouts. Get over yourself, Bakugo! You think you're better than us? Bakugo just laughed, a harsh, grating sound. Let's see. You'll all be scrambling for scraps while I'm acing the UA entrance exam. I'm the only one from this garbage-tier school who has a chance. I'll surpass All Might himself and become the #1 hero. Not to mention the richest. The teacher scanned his clipboard. Oh, that's right. Midoriya, you're aiming for UA too, aren't you? The air went still. The sudden silence was more deafening than the earlier chaos. Every head swiveled to face Izuku. He flinched, shrinking in on himself as if to physically reduce his presence. The tentative smile on his face dissolved. A few seconds passed, and then the laughter started. It wasn't celebratory like before. It was cruel, a tidal wave of mockery that crashed over him. Midoriya? No way, you can't get into the hero course just by studying. He's quirkless. What can he even do, throw his notebook at a villain? No. Izuku stammered, his face burning a shade of crimson that clashed with his green hair. They got rid of that rule. I could be the first one. His words were drowned out by a deafening boom. Bakugo's hand slammed down on Izuku's desk, an explosion charring the wood and sending a wave of hot air washing over him. Izuku yelped, tumbling backward out of his chair and onto the floor. Deku! Bakugo snarled, looming over him. The smell of burnt sugar and nitroglycerin filled Izuku's nostrils. Red eyes, pupils like pinpricks, bored into him. You're worse than these rejects. You're quirkless, a pebble on the side of the road. You think you can stand in the same ring as me? And no, Kaken! That's not what I meant! Izuku scrambled backward, hands held up placatingly. I wouldn't be trying to compete with you. It's been my dream since I was little. And I won't know unless I try. Bakugo's lip curled in a sneer of utter contempt. His eyes flicked to the notebook that had fallen from Izuku's desk. Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13. He snatched it before Izuku could react. What's this, Deku? Your little diary? His cronies snickered, crowding around. Still playing pretend hero? Give it back, Kaken! Izuku pleaded, getting to his feet. It's mine! Bakugo didn't even look at him. He held the notebook between two fingers, brought his other hand up, and pressed his palms together. An explosion, contained and precise, turned years of meticulous notes and drawings into a blackened, smoking ruin. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed it out the open window. Izuku let out a choked cry, watching it sail through the air and land with a soft plop in the koi pond below. The best heroes showed signs of greatness even as students, Bakugo said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing tone. He placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder, the heat from his quirk a palpable threat. I'm a natural. A prodigy. You're just a fanboy. A wannabe. So don't you dare apply to Yui, got it? He turned and walked away, his lackeys trailing behind him like hyenas. Izuku stood there, trembling, the phantom heat of Bakugo's hand burning on his shoulder. The laughter of his classmates felt like 1,000 tiny needles pricking his skin. As he was at the door, Bakugo paused, glancing back over his shoulder. You know, he said, a twisted smile on his face. If you really want a quirk so bad, there's a quick way to do it. Just take a swan dive off the roof and pray you'll be born with one in your next life. The final bell screamed, releasing everyone from the prison of the school day. Izuku was left alone in the empty classroom, the black scorch mark on his desk a permanent reminder of his place in the world. The koi in the pond nibbled at the soggy, charred edges of his notebook. Izuku fished it out, cradling the ruined pages like a fallen friend. The ink had bled, the drawings were warped, but the dream was still there, waterlogged and burnt but stubbornly refusing to dissolve completely. You're an idiot, he thought, his own voice a cruel echo of Bakugo's. A stupid, useless Deku. He clutched the book to his chest and walked, his feet carrying him on autopilot through the familiar streets. He took the long way home, tracing a path under a dark, grimy underpass. The air was cool and damp here, a brief respite from the afternoon sun. It was in that shadow that another shadow detached itself from the wall. A foul, cloying stench of raw sewage and rot filled the air. Izuku's head snapped up. A monstrous, amorphous creature made of green, bubbling sludge was pouring out of a sewer grate. Two massive, cartoonish eyes swam in the muck, fixing on him with malevolent glee. A medium-sized invisibility cloak. The thing gurgled, its voice like mud bubbling up from a swamp. Perfect. Before Izuku could scream, before he could even process the absolute terror that seized his heart, the villain lunged. Sludge filled his mouth, his nose, his lungs. It was thick, suffocating, and terrifyingly strong. He clawed at the gelatinous mass engulfing him, his fingers sinking in uselessly. His vision began to blur, black spots dancing at the edges. I'm dying, was the last coherent thought that cut through the panic. I'm going to die in a sewer, and then a sound. Have no fear! The sewer grate he just passed blasted off its moorings with a metallic shriek. A silhouette, impossibly large and radiating an aura of pure power, filled the entrance to the underpass. For I am here! The figure moved, a blur of red, white and blue. Izuku felt a seismic shift in the air pressure, a concussive force so powerful it felt like the world itself was being punched. Texas smash! The wind pressure was a physical wall. The sludge villain was atomized, splattered across the concrete walls of the underpass in a matter of seconds. Izuku collapsed to the ground, gasping, coughing up foul-tasting slime as his lungs screamed for air. When his vision cleared, he was looking up at the face of his idol. Broad chin, two prominent tufts of blonde hair that defied gravity, and a smile that could calm a hurricane. All Might. The number one hero was there, in the flesh. He was gathering the villain's remains into a 2-liter soda bottle with practiced ease. Izuku's mind, still reeling from the near-death experience, short-circuited and rebooted into fanboy mode. All Might! He squeaked, fumbling for his ruined notebook. See, can I have your autograph? The next few minutes were a blur. All Might, ever the professional, signed his notebook with a flourish. Izuku was starstruck, babbling questions and praise. But as the hero prepared to leap away, a cold, desperate fear gripped Izuku. This was it. This was his one chance. The question that had defined his entire existence was on the tip of his tongue. He had to ask. In a moment of pure, instinct-driven madness, he lunged and grabbed hold of All Might's leg just as the hero launched himself into the sky. The wind was a roaring monster, whipping at his clothes and threatening to tear him from his precarious hold. All Might, shocked, quickly landed them on the roof of a nearby department store. "Young man, that was incredibly reckless," All Might scolded, though there was more concern than anger in his voice. "I love my fans, but that was too much. Now I really must be going." "Wait!" Izuku shouted, the word torn from his throat. "I have to know!" All Might paused. Steam had begun to waft from his muscular form, a strange and unsettling sight. "Even without a quirk," Izuku began, his voice trembling, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles were white. He squeezed his eyes shut, afraid to see the answer on his hero's face. "Can I still be a hero? Can someone quirkless ever hope to be someone like you?" The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. The city noise below, the distant sirens, the hum of traffic, seemed to fade away. When Izuku dared to open his eyes, the man standing before him was not All Might. In his place was a skeletal, almost emaciated figure with sunken eyes and sharp, angular features. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. The hero's costume hung loosely on his frail frame. Izuku stared, his mind refusing to connect the two images. The symbol of peace, a pillar of strength and hope, was this? The man, Toshinori Yagi, as he introduced himself, lifted his shirt to reveal a horrific, swirling scar that dominated the left side of his torso. It was a wound that spoke of a battle beyond mortal comprehension. He explained the injury, the surgeries, the time limit on his hero form. He spoke of the reality of the profession, of the brutal, life-threatening dangers that awaited even those with the most powerful quirks. He looked down at the small, earnest, quirkless boy before him, and his expression was one of profound sadness and pity. "To be a hero, one must be willing to risk their life," he said, his voice soft but firm. "But it is a dangerous job. Without a quirk, you would simply be a liability. You would die." He took a breath, and delivered the final, crushing blow. "So no. I don't think you can be a hero without a quirk." The words were not a shout. They were not an explosion. They were a quiet, surgical strike that severed the main artery of Izuku's dream. He felt something inside him collapse, a support structure that had held him up his entire life turning to dust. He didn't hear All Might tell him that being a police officer or a doctor were also heroic professions. He didn't hear the hero leave. He just stood there on the rooftop, the wind cold against his tear-streaked face, as the hope he had clung to for 15 years bled out onto the concrete. The walk home was a funeral procession for a dream. Each step was heavy, each breath a hollow ache in his chest. The cheerful chatter of people on the street, the bright advertisements on digital billboards, the very vibrancy of the city felt like a personal insult. "It's over," he thought, the words a flat, dead mantra. It was always a stupid, childish dream, Bakugo's words from earlier echoed in his mind. Take a swan dive. For a fleeting, terrifying moment, the thought didn't seem so absurd. What was the point of a life without a purpose? He was so lost in his own bleak thoughts that he didn't notice the crowd until he was in the middle of it. A villain attack. Explosions, crackling and furious, were rocking the narrow commercial street. Smoke billowed into the sky. Pro-heroes were on the scene. Death Arms, with his super strength, was clearing civilians. Kamui Woods was trying to evacuate people from a burning building. The new hero, Empty Lady, was hampered by the narrow street. And the villain, Izuku's blood ran cold. It was the sludge villain. The soda bottle must have fallen from All Might's pocket during their rooftop encounter. It was his fault. This was his fault. And then he saw who the villain had captured. Spiky blonde hair. A furious, terrified face. Explosions erupting from his hands, not as controlled attacks, but as desperate, panic spasms. Bakugo. Kaken was being suffocated, just as he had been. The heroes were helpless. Death Arms couldn't get close enough without getting caught. Kamui Woods was vulnerable to the fire Bakugo's quirk was creating. It was a stalemate, and Bakugo was losing. Izuku saw it all in a flash. He saw the desperation in Bakugo's eyes. It wasn't the look of a rival, or a bully. It was the look of someone who was drowning, begging for a hand to pull them out. And the heroes, they were waiting. Waiting for someone with the right quirk. All Might's words rang in his ears. You cannot be a hero. And in that moment, something inside Izuku Midoriya finally, irrevocably broke. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was a reaction more fundamental than thought. His legs, which had felt like lead moments before, were moving. He burst through the police line, a green blur of motion. The heroes shouted at him. "Kid, stop! It's too dangerous!" He didn't hear them. He only heard a roar in his ears, a static hum that was growing louder and louder. His notebook, still clutched in his hand, flew from his grasp. His mind, the analytical engine that had picked apart hundreds of quirks, was screaming a single, primal command: save him. The world seemed to slow down. The sludge villain turned its malevolent eyes towards him. It raised a slimy tendril to swat him like a fly. Danger! The hum in his head escalated into a piercing shriek. A searing, white-hot pain erupted in his hands, so intense it felt like his bones were on fire. It was an agony beyond anything he had ever known. He let out a cry, but it wasn't his own. It was a raw, guttural roar that clawed its way out of his throat, the sound of a caged animal breaking free. 3 blades of pale, white bone, sharp as scalpels, tore through the skin over his knuckles on each hand. Blood, dark and crimson, welled up around them, slicking the bone. The pain was blinding, but underneath it was a surge of something else. Something wild. Power. His senses exploded. The world, which had been a muted gray of despair, erupted into a supernova of information. He could hear the frantic, rabbit-quick heartbeat of a woman in the back of the crowd. He could smell the acrid tang of Bakugo's sweat, the ozone from the explosions, the foul stench of the villain, all as distinct, separate scents. His vision sharpened to an impossible degree. He could see the cracks in the asphalt 10 meters away. It was too much. A wave of nausea and vertigo washed over him, but the shriek in his head, a frantic, pulsing alarm, cut through the sensory chaos. Move! Now! The villain's tendril swung down. Izuku's body responded before his brain could issue a command. He didn't dodge. He flowed. He dropped low, his body contorting in a way that should have been impossible, the attack passing inches over his head. His feet, clad in their worn red sneakers, pushed off the ground, but instead of slipping on the slick sludge, they stuck. For a fraction of a second, his shoes adhered to the slimy surface, giving him impossible traction. He launched himself forward, not running, but pouncing. He didn't aim for the villain's eyes as his analytical mind had suggested in his notebook. He aimed for Bakugo. The shriek in his head guided him, painting a mental picture of the villain's weak points, the subtle shifts in its mass that signaled an incoming attack. He weaved and dodged, a green phantom moving with a predatory grace he had never possessed. He reached the villain. It was a mountain of filth, but he didn't hesitate. He leaped, and this time, when his hands and feet made contact with the wall of a nearby building, they stuck. He scrambled up the brickwork, defying gravity, his movements fluid and certain. He was 5 meters up before his conscious mind even registered what he was doing. From the apex of his climb, he launched himself through the air. He was a missile, a hunter diving at its prey. He landed on the villain's back, his feet sinking into the sludge but finding purchase. The newly formed claws on his hands, slick with his own blood, were not a thought. They were an extension of his will. He drove them into the sludge, not swiping, but tearing. He ripped and clawed with a ferocity that was utterly alien to him, shredding the semi-solid form. The villain howled, its voice a gurgling shriek of pain and surprise. It tried to grab him, to absorb him, but the precognitive alarm in his head screamed a warning for every move it made. He was untouchable. He tore a path straight to Bakugo's trapped form. With a final, desperate roar, he hooked his bloody claws into the sludge around Bakugo's collar and pulled. His strength was stupendous. The sinews in his arms and back coiled like steel springs, and with a sound like tearing fabric, he ripped Bakugo free from the villain's core. He tossed his gasping, choking rival aside like a rag doll, putting himself between Bakugo and the enraged mass of slime. He stood his ground, legs braced, claws extended. Blood dripped from his knuckles onto the grimy street. His chest heaved, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror, pain, and a terrifying, exhilarating rush of feral instinct. He was no longer Izuku Midoriya, the quirkless Deku. He was something else, something primal. It was this scene that finally shocked the number one hero into action. All Might, back in his hero form and having rushed to the scene, had been frozen in place, utterly dumbfounded by the boy's transformation. Now, seeing the boy shielding his tormentor, a fire ignited in his soul. I really am pathetic. All Might boomed, his voice resonating with shame and newfound resolve. He appeared in front of Izuku in an instant. I should practice what I preach. He pulled his arm back. Detroit. Smash! The punch changed the weather. The force of the blow was so immense that it created a swirling vortex, scattering the sludge villain and causing rain to fall from the clear sky. The battle was over. The aftermath was a strange, muted silence. The crowd was staring, not at All Might, but at the small, trembling boy standing in the middle of the street. The heroes, who had been berating him moments ago, were now approaching him with a caution one would reserve for a wounded, dangerous animal. The adrenaline began to fade, and the pain returned with a vengeance. His hands throbbed with an agony that made him want to scream. He looked down at them, at the blood, at the impossible bone claws. They were real. They were part of him. A wave of nausea hit him, and he stumbled. The claws began to recede. It was a slow, sickening process. He could feel them sliding back under his skin, a grinding, scraping sensation that made his stomach turn. He collapsed to his knees, panting, the sensory overload dimming to a dull, throbbing headache. Bakugo was on his hands and knees a few feet away, coughing and staring at him. The usual rage and arrogance in his eyes were gone, replaced by something Izuku had never seen directed at him before. A mixture of raw terror and complete, utter disbelief. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, approached. Izuku looked up, his vision blurry. All Might stood before him, the rain plastering his blonde hair to his forehead. The hero's signature smile, the one that had been a beacon of hope for Izuku his entire life, was gone. In its place was an expression of profound awe, deep concern, and 1,000 unspoken questions. The symbol of peace knelt, bringing himself down to eye level with the bleeding, exhausted boy. His voice, stripped of its usual bravado, was quiet and intensely serious. My boy, All Might said, his blue eyes searching Izuku's face. What in the world was that? The manufactured rain from All Might's final punch tapered off, leaving the air clean and heavy with the scent of ozone and wet asphalt. For a long moment, the world was a frozen tableau, a stunned crowd, a handful of bewildered pro-heroes, a shell-shocked Bakugo, and the symbol of peace kneeling before a bleeding, trembling boy. My boy, what in the world was that? All Might's question, though spoken softly, echoed in the sudden quiet. Izuku's mind was a maelstrom. The phantom sensation of bones sliding through his skin, the deafening roar in his ears, the impossible flood of sensory data. It all swirled together into a cocktail of terror and confusion. He looked at his hands, now bare and smudged with drying blood, but the memory of the claws was seared into his brain. I don't know, he whispered, his voice hoarse. It just happened. It just happened. Death Arms barked, striding forward. His face, normally a mask of heroic resolve, was tight with suspicion. Kid, you ran into a live combat zone. You manifested a highly destructive quirk you clearly have no control over. You're lucky you're not in cuffs right now. Now, let's not be hasty. Backdraft intervened, his water hoses still dripping. He saved the hostage when we couldn't. The boy's a hero. He's a reckless vigilante. Death Arms countered. The argument faded into background noise for Izuku. His gaze drifted to Bakugo, who was now being attended to by paramedics. Bakugo shoved them away, his eyes locked on Izuku. There was no gratitude there. There was a raw, gaping wound of pride, and underneath it, a tremor of fear. Their entire world, the carefully constructed hierarchy with Bakugo at the apex and Izuku at the absolute bottom, had been shattered. Bakugo simply turned, his shoulders rigid, and stalked away without a word. All Might rose to his full, towering height, casting a shadow that silenced the other heroes. The boy acted impulsively, yes, he said, his voice carrying an unquestionable authority. But he acted when we did not. I will take full responsibility for him. He and I need to have a private conversation. He placed a hand the size of a dinner plate on Izuku's shoulder, his grip surprisingly gentle. The gesture was both a comfort and a cage, ensuring Izuku wasn't going anywhere. With a few placating words to the other pros and a final, reassuring wave to the media that was now swarming the perimeter, All Might guided Izuku away from the chaos, down a side alley, and into the quiet anonymity of the city's backstreets. The transformation happened in the blink of an eye. With a great hiss of steam, the mountain of muscle deflated, leaving the skeletal Toshinori Yagi in its place. He coughed, a racking, painful sound, and wiped a fleck of blood from his lips with the back of his hand. They walked in silence for several minutes until they reached a small, forgotten park nestled between two towering apartment buildings. A single rusty swing set and a pair of worn benches were its only features. Toshinori sat heavily on one of the benches, gesturing for Izuku to do the same. Izuku sat, his hands resting on his knees. He stared at the four small, puckered scars over his knuckles on each hand, the only remaining physical evidence of the bone claws. They were already healing, the skin knitting itself back together with an unnatural speed. "You told me you were quirkless," Toshinori said, his voice quiet, devoid of accusation. It was a simple statement of fact. I am, Izuku stammered. "My whole life. The doctor's diagnosis, the extra joint in my pinky toe, everyone said so. I believed it. Today, on the rooftop. I believed it, and then?" Izuku took a shaky breath, trying to put the chaotic experience into words. "When I saw Kaken. Bakugo. I couldn't just stand there. My legs just moved. And then, it was like a dam broke inside my head. It was so loud. Everything was so loud. I could smell the smoke, but not just smoke, I could smell the chemicals in it. I could hear people's hearts beating. And the pain." He instinctively cradled his hands. "It felt like my bones were ripping through me. I couldn't control it. I couldn't control anything. I just wanted to save him." Toshinori listened intently, his sunken eyes never leaving Izuku's face. He saw the genuine terror in the boy's expression, the fear of his own unknown power. This wasn't the arrogance of a late bloomer finally getting his due. This was the shock of a man who'd been handed a live grenade. "I am sorry, young Midoriya," Toshinori said, and the sincerity in his voice startled Izuku. "On that roof, I told you that you couldn't be a hero. I was projecting my own limitations, my own fears onto you. I gave you the logical, sensible answer. But heroism is rarely logical. What you did back there, running in when every instinct for self-preservation screamed to stay put, that was the heart of a true hero." Izuku's eyes widened, tears welling up. The validation he had craved his entire life was finally being given to him, but it felt hollow, tainted by the terrifying power that had earned it. "But I'm a monster, aren't I? That power, it was so violent. I wanted to tear that villain apart. Power is a tool, my boy. It is neither monstrous nor divine. It is simply a force, and its nature is defined by the one who wields it," Toshinori said, leaning forward. "Which brings us to the real issue. You now possess a quirk of phenomenal, if terrifying, potential. A power like that, left untamed and undisciplined, is a catastrophe waiting to happen. It could consume you, turn you into the very thing you fight against." He paused, his gaze intense. "When I was younger, I inherited a great power. A sacred torch passed down through generations. I thought I knew what to do with it, but I was reckless. I was arrogant. I learned control through pain and loss." He gestured to the horrific scar on his side. "I cannot, in good conscience, pass that torch to you." Izuku's heart sank. Of course. It was too much to hope for. "You don't need it," Toshinori continued, and Izuku's head snapped up. "My boy, you have more than enough power of your own. To add my quirk, one for all, to your already volatile system would be like throwing gasoline on a bonfire. It would tear you apart. No, what you need is not more power. What you need is what I can offer you instead, mentorship." Izuku stared, speechless. "For the next 10 months, until the UA entrance exam, I will train you," Toshinori declared, a flicker of the old All Might fire in his eyes. "I will not train you to be stronger. You are already strong. I will train you to be smarter. I will teach you control, discipline, and restraint. I will teach you how to master the beast that now lives inside you, so that you wield it, and it does not wield you. I will teach you how to be a hero, not just in body, but in mind and spirit. Will you accept? The choice was not a choice at all. It was a lifeline. It was the only path forward that didn't lead to a dark, terrifying abyss. Tears streamed freely down Izuku's face now, but they were not tears of despair. They were tears of overwhelming, cathartic release. Yes, he choked out, bowing his head. Yes, All Might. Thank you. Thank you. The first 3 months, control and analysis. The training began not with a bang, but with a breath. Their dojo was the Goba Municipal Beach Park, a sprawling monument to illegal dumping, choked with mountains of rusted appliances and discarded furniture. The salt-laced air was thick with the stench of decay. Your power is tied to your emotional state, Toshinori explained, sitting in a rickety lawn chair while Izuku sat cross-legged on the sand. Fear, anger, desperation, they are the triggers that let the beast off its leash. The first step to controlling the beast is to control your own heart, and so, they started with meditation. 4 hours every day after school, Izuku would sit amidst the garbage, trying to find a center of calm within the hurricane of his new senses. At first, it was impossible. He could hear seagulls from a mile away, smell the grease from a food stall 5 blocks over, feel the vibrations of the subway rumbling deep underground. It was a constant, overwhelming assault. Build filters, Toshinori advised. Don't try to block it all out. Acknowledge each sound, each scent, and then let it go. Create a quiet room inside your own mind. Slowly, painstakingly, he began to make progress. The cacophony began to resolve into distinct sounds he could identify and dismiss. The world became less of a sensory scream and more of a complex orchestra he was learning to conduct. The claws were another matter. They were a direct line to his most primal emotions. One afternoon, while struggling to solve a particularly difficult math problem, his frustration spiked, and with a painful snick, the claws shot out, carving 3 deep gouges into his bedroom desk. His mother, Inko, had nearly fainted. He learned to feel the build-up, a hot, itching pressure in his knuckles that preceded their appearance. Following Toshinori's guidance, he would stop whatever he was doing, close his eyes, and focus on his breathing until the pressure subsided. Retracting them was harder. It required a conscious, deliberate act of will, a calm certainty that was difficult to muster when he was panicking. It felt like trying to coax a frightened cat back into its carrier. During this time, Izuku did what he did best. He analyzed. He filled a brand new notebook, emblazoned with the title, Totem, Quirk Analysis, Volume 1, with frantic, meticulous notes. He refused to see his new abilities as a single, monstrous entity. He broke it down, categorized it, and gave its components names, an act of intellectual dominance over the physical chaos. The Weaver aspect, this covered the impossible agility, the perfect equilibrium, the proportional strength of an arachnid, and the ability to adhere to any surface. Most importantly, it included the precognitive danger sense, the incessant shriek in his head that had saved him from the sludge villain. He dubbed it the hunter's instinct. It was his defense, his evasion, his grace. The berserker aspect, this was the dark side. The retractable bone claws, the rapid healing factor that knitted his skin back together in minutes, and the hyperacute animalistic senses. It was also the source of the untamed, feral rage he had felt during the attack. This was his weapon, his savagery, his danger. The king aspect, this was the most mysterious. He had only felt hints of it. The incredible density of his bones, a base level of strength and speed that felt far beyond even the Weaver aspect, and a strange, humming potential he could feel deep in his cells. He theorized it was some form of energy absorption and redistribution, but he hadn't been able to replicate it. This was his shield, his foundation, his potential. By naming the parts of his quirk, he began to understand them. By understanding them, he began to control them. The middle 4 months, application and invention. Cleaning this entire beach in 10 months is your primary physical goal, Toshinori announced one day, gesturing to the mountains of trash. Your strength is immense, but it is unrefined. You will learn its limits, and your own, by moving this junk. This is your weight room, your gymnasium, and your classroom. And so, Izuku worked. He hauled rusted refrigerators, dragged waterlogged couches, and stacked mountains of tires. His scrawny frame began to change. The soft lines of a boyish physique were carved away, replaced by the lean, wiry muscle of a predator. He wasn't bulky like All Might. He was built like a gymnast or a rock climber, every muscle fiber honed for explosive, efficient movement. Tashinori used the junk piles as an elaborate, ever-changing obstacle course. "Don't just run, young Midoriya! Flow!" he would shout. "Use the Weaver aspect! Trust your body! Trust the instinct!" Izuku learned to leap from the top of a washing machine to the hood of a crushed car, his balance perfect. He learned to scale a vertical pile of compacted trash as if it were a flat sidewalk. He would sprint, backflip, and tumble through the metallic maze, his movements becoming more fluid, more certain, more inhuman with each passing day. He was learning the language of his new body. It was during one of these sessions, while perched atop a teetering pillar of old televisions, that he had an epiphany. "My mobility is incredible," he muttered to himself, jotting notes in his book during a water break. "The Weaver aspect gives me three-dimensional awareness and movement potential, but I'm limited by the distance I can jump. I'm fast, but I'm not a flyer. I need a bridge. A line. A way to traverse open space." The answer was obvious, a core component of the totem he was emulating. A web. His natural quirk didn't produce any kind of webbing, but Izuku's mind was his true ultimate weapon. He began to scavenge. The beach was a treasure trove of discarded electronics, old plumbing, and chemical containers. He took home busted remote controls for their buttons, medical braces for their straps, and nozzles from aerosol cans. His nights became a flurry of activity. He devoured online textbooks on polymer chemistry and fluid dynamics. His room, already a shrine to hero worship, transformed into a makeshift laboratory. There were failed experiments, a mixture that was too watery, another that hardened instantly into brittle plastic, and one particularly memorable batch that exploded, coating his All Might poster in a sticky, foul-smelling goo. Finally, after weeks of trial and error, he cracked it. A high-tensile, viscoelastic fluid that was stored under high pressure in small, replaceable cartridges. The delivery system was a pair of wrist-mounted shooters, cobbled together from scavenged parts and secured with reinforced straps. He took them to the beach at dawn, before Tashinori arrived. His heart hammered in his chest. He aimed at a derelict refrigerator 50 meters away, depressed the trigger mechanism in his palm, and with a quiet thwip, a thin, silvery line shot out, sticking to the rusted metal with a solid thwack. He tugged on it. It was strong. Impossibly strong. A wide, genuine grin spread across his face. It was the first time he had truly smiled in months. He had taken a weakness in his quirk and, through sheer intellect and determination, had forged a solution. This led to his next project, a costume. His gym clothes were constantly getting ripped and shredded. He needed something durable. He saved up his allowance and bought surplus military-grade ripstop fabric online. He taught himself how to sew, his stitches clumsy at first, then becoming more precise. The design was simple and practical, a form-fitting, dark green bodysuit with black accents, a red utility belt to hold his web cartridges, and a full-face mask with large, white lenses. The lenses were mirrored, hiding his identity, but also helping to focus his enhanced vision and protect him from the sensory overload of a chaotic battle. It was simple, functional, and his. The final 3 months, integration and discipline. "You've mastered the Weaver," Tashinori said, observing as Izuku swung effortlessly between two cranes at the edge of the now-clearing beach. "But you've been neglecting the other aspects. It's time to face them." They began to work on the king aspect. "From your notes, you believe you can absorb and redirect kinetic energy," Tashinori stated. "Let's test that theory." He powered up into his All Might form, the change still a shocking sight. "Now stomp on the ground. As hard as you can. But don't just stomp. As you do it, will the energy into yourself. Absorb the impact." Izuku did as he was told. He stomped, and as his foot hit the sand, he felt a strange, humming vibration travel up his leg, settling deep in his core. It felt like charging a battery. He did it again, and again. A faint, violet aura began to shimmer around his body. Good! All Might boomed. Now hit me, Izuku hesitated. But I can take it. Channel that energy into your fist and strike the palm of my hand. Don't hold back. Izuku took a deep breath, focused on the humming energy within him, and threw a punch. As his fist connected with All Might's hand, he released the stored energy. There was no sound, but a powerful concussive blast of purple energy erupted from the point of impact, kicking up a massive cloud of sand and forcing the number 1 hero to slide back a full meter. All Might looked at his tingling palm, then back at Izuku, his ever-present smile widening. Incredible! They practiced this for weeks. Izuku learned to absorb the energy from landing after a high swing, from blocking attacks, and even from the force of All Might's own punches. He learned to hold the charge, letting it build, and to release it in controlled bursts or devastating blasts. He even discovered he could channel it into his claws, making them glow with purple energy and capable of shearing through solid steel. The king aspect was not just defense. It was the ultimate counterattack. But there was one final demon to exorcise, the Berserker Rage. Their sparring sessions became more intense. All Might would push him, harrying him, forcing him onto the defensive, trying to make him angry or afraid. What's wrong, young Midoriya? He'd taunt, easily sidestepping a web blast. Is that all you have? The villain won't go this easy on you. One evening it worked. Exhausted, frustrated, and sore, Izuku felt the familiar hot pressure in his knuckles. He lunged, a snarl twisting his lips, his claws extending with a grim snick. The world narrowed to a red haze. He was no longer thinking, only reacting. He swiped at All Might, who simply held up a piece of a rusted car door as a makeshift shield. The claws tore through the metal with a horrific screech, leaving 3 deep furrows. There it is, All Might said, his voice calm and steady, cutting through the red haze. The rage. Do you feel it? It wants control. It's telling you to tear, to maim, to kill. But who is in charge, my boy? You or the beast? Izuku froze, his claws inches from All Might's face. He was panting, his whole body trembling with suppressed violence. He looked into his mentor's eyes and saw not fear, but unwavering belief. You decide, All Might said softly. You decide when it comes out. You decide when it goes away. It is a tool. Nothing more. Now, put it away. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut. He focused on his breathing, on the sound of the waves, on the quiet room he had built in his mind. The red haze receded. The feral snarl on his face softened. With a shuddering, painful slowness, he retracted the claws, his hands returning to normal. He collapsed to his knees, utterly spent. Restraint, young Midoriya, All Might said, reverting to his skeletal form and placing a hand on his shoulder. True strength is not the power to destroy. It is the wisdom to know when not to. On the final day of the 10th month, Izuku stood before a completely spotless beach. The last piece of junk, a burnout motorcycle, was perched atop a perfect pyramid of compacted trash. The sun was rising over the ocean, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Tashinori stood beside him, a rare, proud smile on his face. You did it, my boy. You did more than I ever asked. Izuku looked at his hands. The scars over his knuckles were faint, silvery lines now, a permanent reminder of the power that lay dormant beneath his skin. He was no longer the scrawny, trembling boy who had chased after his idol. He was lean, strong, and moved with a silent, predatory grace. The constant fear that had plagued him for months had been replaced by a quiet, hard-won confidence. The morning of the entrance exam, he stood before the colossal gates of UA High School. He was dressed in his school uniform, but underneath, he could feel the comfortable weight of his web shooter strapped to his wrists. Other students buzzed around him, chattering excitedly, their quirks practically vibrating in the air. He felt a familiar spike of anxiety, a ghost of his old self. Then, he took a deep breath, filtering out the noise, centering himself. He looked up at the towering glass building, not with the desperate hope of a fan, but with the calm focus of a hunter entering a new territory. He wasn't here to ask for a chance. He was here to take it. The auditorium was vast, dark, and thrumming with the collective anxiety of hundreds of aspiring heroes. A palpable energy, a static crackle of 1,000 different quirks held in check, filled the air. Izuku Midoriya sat in the plush velvet seat, a small island of calm in a sea of nervous chatter. His new senses, now finely honed and filtered through 10 months of grueling meditation, gave him a unique perspective. He could hear the frantic, staccato heartbeats of the students around him. He could smell the faint, acrid tang of stress sweat mixed with a dozen different perfumes and colognes. He could feel the subtle vibrations in the floor from the boy in the row behind him, who was nervously tapping his foot with superhuman speed. It was all data, processed and categorized by a mind that no longer saw the world in simple terms. He was no longer a spectator. He was a predator in a new ecosystem, observing, analyzing. "Welcome, examinee listeners!" A voice like a sonic boom erupted from the stage, shaking the very foundations of the building. "I'm your host for today, Present Mike. Everybody say hey." A dead, awkward silence answered him. Izuku almost winced at the sheer volume. "Tough crowd!" Present Mike yelled, undeterred. He launched into a high-speed explanation of the practical exam. They would be split into different testing grounds, urban mock-ups where they would face an army of robotic villains. Each robot had a point value, 1, 2, or 3, based on its difficulty. The goal was to score as many points as possible by disabling them. Izuku absorbed the information, his eyes scanning the provided handout. The schematics of the robots were simplified, but he could already see the weak points: exposed actuators at the joints, primary sensor arrays on the heads, power conduits running along their spines. His mind was already formulating strategies, running combat simulations. "And finally, there's the fourth villain type," Present Mike continued, a massive silhouette appearing on the screen behind him. It was a gargantuan robot that dwarfed the illustrated buildings. "This bad boy is the zero-pointer. He's worth, you guessed it, 0 points. Think of him as a gimmick, an obstacle to be avoided. My advice? Run away!" As the explanation concluded, a tall, powerfully built young man with dark blue hair and glasses stood up, his arm chopping the air with rigid precision. "Excuse me, sir, I have a question," he announced, his voice ringing with authority. "On the printout, there are clearly 4 types of villains listed, yet you have only discussed 3 with point values. If this is a misprint, it is a gross oversight for an institution as prestigious as UA." He then swiveled, his arm now pointing directly at Izuku. "And you, with the messy green hair, you have been muttering and fidgeting this entire time. If you are not taking this seriously, then you should leave. You are distracting those of us who are here to become heroes." A spotlight seemed to fall on Izuku. All heads turned. The Izuku from 10 months ago would have imploded, stammering apologies and turning beet red. This Izuku simply blinked, his expression unreadable. He hadn't even realized he was muttering, his analysis of the robot schematics spilling out in a low hum. He took a slow, calming breath, centering himself. "My apologies," Izuku said, his voice quiet but steady, carrying easily in the silent auditorium. "I was simply analyzing the potential structural weaknesses in the villains. I meant no disrespect." The blue-haired boy, Tenya Ida, was taken aback. He had expected a flustered denial, not a calm, analytical response. The sheer confidence, understated as it was, threw him off balance. He bowed stiffly and sat back down, a thoughtful frown on his face. Izuku looked down at his own hands, flexing his fingers. He could feel the web shooters, cool and solid against his wrists, hidden by the sleeves of his tracksuit. He could feel the low, thrumming potential deep in his bones. 10 months of training. 10 months of pain, control, and discovery. It all came down to this. The bus ride to Battle Center B was quiet. Izuku kept to himself, eyes closed, mentally running through his arsenal. The Weaver. The Berserker. The King. He had control over them, but it was a conscious, demanding effort, like holding 3 powerful hunting dogs on a single leash. As the examinees gathered before the towering gates of the mock city, a vast, sprawling metropolis of concrete and steel, he spotted the girl from the auditorium, the one with the round, kind face. She was bouncing on her toes, taking deep breaths, a mantra of, "I can do this," on her lips. A wave of nervousness, a phantom echo of his old self, washed over him. He knew that feeling all too well. He was about to offer a word of encouragement when Tenya Ida appeared again, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. "I see you've identified that girl's lack of focus," Ida said in a low, serious tone. "Are you planning to interfere with her concentration in order to gain an advantage? I would not have thought Yue would allow such sabotage." Izuku turned to face him, his expression placid. "I was just going to wish her good luck," he stated simply. "We're all nervous. A little encouragement helps." Ida's jaw tightened, his mind clearly struggling to process Izuku's behavior. Before he could formulate another accusation, President Mick's voice echoed from a massive speaker tower. "All right, listeners, let's get this party started. The test has no countdown in a real fight. Go, go, go!" The massive gates began to slide open. For a heartbeat, everyone was frozen in confusion. Everyone except Izuku. The hunter's instinct screamed in his head a split second before the announcement. It wasn't a voice. It was a pure, primal jolt of awareness, an instinct that screamed action is required now. While the other examinees were still processing the words, Izuku was already moving. He burst forward, a green blur leaving the stunned crowd behind. He sprinted into the foe city, his feet pounding a rapid, silent rhythm on the pavement. He didn't need to see the robots. He could feel their vibrations through the soles of his shoes, could hear the whine of their electric motors. The first one appeared around a corner, a squat, one-point robot on tank treads, its single red optics swiveling to lock onto him. Thwip! A silvery white line shot from his wrist, impacting the corner of a skyscraper 30 stories up. He pulled, launching himself into the air, soaring over the robot in a graceful arc. The other examinees, just now pouring into the city, looked up in astonishment. "What the hell?" one of them yelled. "Is that part of his quirk?" While airborne, Izuku twisted his body. He was no longer just a boy, he was a creature of the concrete jungle. His feet made contact with the glass and steel wall of the building, and they stuck. He pushed off, launching himself horizontally across the street. He landed silently on the back of a two-point robot that was menacing a group of students. Before its targeting system could even register his presence, his hands flashed, snicked. The bone claws, pale and sharp, slid from his knuckles. He wasn't aiming to smash. That was inefficient. That was what Bakugo would do. Instead, he drove his claws into the seams of the robot's main torso panel, wrenched it open with a screech of tortured metal, and with surgical precision, severed the thick bundle of power cables within. The robot's red eye flickered and died. It slumped forward inert. He retracted his claws and vaulted off its back before it even finished falling. 1 point. 3 points. He moved through the city like a phantom. He was a whirlwind of controlled, calculated chaos. He web-swung between buildings, the city his personal playground, his movements a three-dimensional ballet of breathtaking speed and agility. He used his webs for more than just travel. He fired a glob of webbing into the cannon of a three-pointer, causing it to backfire and explode. He shot 2 lines and used a massive piece of debris as a makeshift wrecking ball, taking out a cluster of robots in one go. His hunter's instinct was his greatest asset. It was a perfect 360-degree radar of danger. It guided him not just away from attacks, but towards opportunities. Danger, to the left. He glanced down an alley and saw a boy with a laser naval quirk pinned down by 2 one-pointers. Izuku didn't even break his swing. He fired a web line that snagged the boy's collar and yanked him into the air, depositing him safely on a nearby rooftop before dropping down to dismantle the 2 robots with a series of powerful, precise kicks that shattered their leg servos. Thanks," the boy stuttered, wide-eyed. Izuku just gave a curt nod and was gone, swinging away into the concrete canyons. Rescue points acquired, a voice noted in the observation room. He saw the kind-faced girl again, Achiko Uraraka. He'd heard someone call her. She was tapping robots, making them float helplessly into the air. It was a clever strategy, but she was so focused on one target that she didn't see the shrapnel from a nearby explosion hurtling towards her. His instinct screamed. He was too far to reach her. Instead, he aimed his web shooter and fired a rapid-fire volley. 3 small, sticky pellets of webbing intercepted the largest pieces of metal, sticking them to a nearby wall. Uraraka flinched at the sound, saw the webbed shrapnel, and looked around in confusion before her eyes landed on Izuku, perched like a gargoyle on a lamppost 2 blocks away. He gave her a small, 2-fingered salute and swung away. He was a ghost, a guardian angel, a predator. He racked up villain points with terrifying efficiency, but his rescue point tally was climbing at an almost equal rate. He wasn't just fighting, he was controlling the battlefield, subtly protecting the other examinees while achieving his own objective. He was demonstrating not just power, but the core tenet of heroism. In a darkened room, dozens of monitors displayed live feeds from all the battle centers. A group of pro-heroes, the faculty of UA, watched in silence. "That kid in Battle Center D, the explosive one, he's got incredible power," Snipe commented, tipping his cowboy hat. "Racked up 77 points already, but his technique is brutish," Cementos countered. "All destruction, no finesse. And his rescue point score is a flat 0. He's actively endangering other students to get to his targets." All eyes drifted to the monitors for Battle Center B. On screen, a green-clad figure was running vertically up the side of a 50-story building to evade a pincer attack from 3 robots. President Mike let out a low whistle. "And then you got this listener. Holy smokes. What even is his quirk? Super agility? Wall crawling? Those weird claws? The web things? The webs are a support item." A tired, bored voice cut in. Shota Aizawa, Eraserhead, leaned forward, his chin resting on his hand, his gaze sharp and analytical. "Impressive craftsmanship for a kid his age, but the rest, it's some kind of complex mutation. Look at his movements. They're not just athletic, they're predatory. He's not thinking, he's reacting. A powerful danger sense quirk is at the core of it. His score is off the charts," Midnight added, a predatory smile of her own on her lips. 68 villain points and, good heavens, 45 rescue points? That's unheard of. He is the perfect synthesis of combat prowess and heroic instinct," Principal Niza said, sipping his tea. "He is efficient, powerful, and protective. He is precisely what we look for," Aizawa just grunted. "He's a wild card. Unpredictable. Power like that, with that level of instinctual control, it's either the makings of the greatest hero of his generation, or a disaster waiting to happen." Suddenly, the ground began to shake. A deep, grinding tremor that vibrated through the very bones of the city. A shadow fell over the street where Izuku had just landed, a shadow so vast it plunged everything into an artificial twilight. He looked up. And up. And up. The zero-pointer. It was more massive than he could have imagined, a behemoth of dark metal and glowing red optics that towered over the tallest skyscrapers. Its movements were slow but apocalyptic. Every step was an earthquake, shattering pavement, and cracking the foundations of nearby buildings. The other examinees did exactly what President Mike had advised. They screamed and ran. It was a force of nature, an unwinnable battle. The smart move was to get away and hunt for smaller, point-bearing prey. Izuku's hunter's instinct was a deafening, continuous siren in his skull, screaming at him to flee. His logical mind agreed. There was no benefit to fighting this thing. He was about to web-swing away when he heard a faint cry for help. "Ow, somebody, please!" His head snapped towards the sound. There, not 30 meters from the zero-pointer's path, was Achiko Uraraka. A large slab of concrete had pinned her leg to the ground. She was trapped, her face pale with terror as the mechanical titan lumbered towards her. The other students ran past her, their own survival their only concern. The screaming in Izuku's head changed. It was no longer a warning of personal danger. It was a declaration. Innocent is threatened. Protect. All Might's words from their training echoed in his mind. Restraint is the wisdom to know when not to destroy. But sometimes, a hero has no choice but to act. In those moments, you must be a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. Be decisive. End the threat. This was one of those moments. He didn't hesitate. He broke into a dead sprint, not away from the robot, but directly towards it. The zero-pointer raised its colossal foot, preparing to take another step, a step that would crush Uraraka. "No, you don't!" Izuku growled, the sound deeper and more guttural than his normal voice. He focused, reaching deep inside himself for the humming power he called the king aspect. With every earth-shaking stomp the robot had taken, a jolt of kinetic energy had pulsed through the ground. He now opened the floodgates, drawing that ambient energy into himself. A faint, violet aura, barely visible in the daylight, began to shimmer around his body. He leaped onto a pile of rubble and then onto the robot's massive shoe, which was the size of a small bus. As the robot began to lift its leg, he started to run. His feet stuck to the metal plating, allowing him to sprint vertically up its shin. The robot's internal sensors finally registered him as a threat. A dozen gun turrets swiveled and opened fire. His hunter's instinct went into overdrive. He moved in a blur, zigzagging up the leg, the laser fire and bullets peppering the metal where he had been fractions of a second before. He was a gnat harassing a god, too small and too fast to hit. He absorbed the kinetic energy of every bullet that impacted near him, his violet aura growing brighter, more intense. The hum in his core became a roar. He reached the robot's torso and kept climbing. He was a violet comet scaling a mountain of steel. The robot raised its massive, building-sized hand to swat him off. Izuku timed it perfectly. Just as the hand swung in, he pushed off the chest plate, leaping into the air and landing on the back of the swinging hand. He ran along the arm, the wind whipping past him, his aura now a blazing beacon of purple light. He reached the shoulder, then the neck. He looked up at the head, the size of a house, its single, glowing red optic fixing on him. He coiled his legs, channeling every ounce of his natural strength, every joule of the kinetic energy he had absorbed, into this one final act. He launched himself from the shoulder, a blur of green and violent purple. He pulled his right arm back, and with a final, guttural roar, he drove his fist into the robot's head. Snicked. At the moment of impact, he instinctively unleashed his claws, not for slashing, but to focus the energy to a finer point. The sound was not a boom. It was a deafening crack, like reality itself had fractured. A catastrophic explosion of pure kinetic energy, visible as a dome of brilliant purple light, erupted from his fist. The shockwave blew out every window for 3 blocks. The robot's head didn't just dent. It didn't just explode. It shattered, imploding into a maelstrom of twisted shrapnel and sparking wires. The colossal body, now headless, froze for a moment. Then, with a groan of protesting metal that echoed across the city, it began to topple backward, away from Uraraka. Izuku was now falling from a height of over 50 stories. The kinetic discharge had left him momentarily drained, his muscles screaming in protest. But his mind was clear. He fired a web line at a nearby building, the line catching with a solid thwack. His fall turned into a dizzying pendulum swing. At the apex of his arc, he shot another web, then another, gracefully descending until he landed in a crouch on the street below, not 10 feet from where Uraraka was still trapped. The silence that followed was absolute. Every single examinee, those who had fled and those who had watched from a distance, was staring at him, their faces a mixture of awe, disbelief, and outright terror. "Time's up!" President Mick's voice blared, breaking the spell. Izuku ignored it. He walked over to Uraraka, the violet aura fading from his body. The adrenaline was leaving him, and a deep, bone-weary exhaustion was setting in. He knelt. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice surprisingly gentle. She could only stare up at him, her eyes wide. You destroyed it." He looked at the massive slab pinning her leg. He placed his hands on it and lifted. The concrete, weighing several hundred pounds, moved with a groan, and he shifted it aside. He offered her a hand. As he did, he felt the familiar, itching pressure in his knuckles finally recede. With a faint, almost inaudible scraping sound, his claws retracted back into his hands, the skin healing over instantly. Uraraka took his hand, and he helped her to her feet. She winced, unable to put weight on her injured ankle. He looked at her, then at the stunned faces of the other examinees, and finally at his own shaking hands. A small, tired smile touched his lips. It wasn't the bright, sunny smile of all might. It was something sharper, something wilder. A reassuring, if slightly feral, smile. In the UE observation room, the faculty was speechless. President Mike had his face in his hands. Midnight's fan was snapped shut. Even Nisa's perpetual smile had slipped a fraction. Aizawa leaned forward, his dark eyes narrowed, replaying the footage of Izuku's final attack on his monitor. He saw the kinetic absorption, the impossible climb, the savage precision of the final blow, and the controlled descent. He saw a level of power that could rival a top pro, coupled with a terrifying, instinctual combat sense. He saw a boy who had broken every metric they had. He leaned back in his chair, a dry, humorless smirk touching his lips. Well now, he murmured to himself, the words of prophecy. This one's going to be a problem. The acceptance letter from Yui was not a surprise. It was an inevitability, a confirmation of the cataclysmic statement Izuku had made during the practical exam. The small, disc-shaped projector sat on his desk, casting a holographic image of a beaming All Might into his bedroom. Young Midoriya, my boy! The hero's projection boomed, making the action figures on Izuku's shelves tremble. Congratulations! You passed with flying colors! Truly, you blew us all away! The hologram then displayed the results. Villain points, 68. Rescue points, 60. A total of 128 points. It was a new Yui record, shattering the previous one by a colossal margin. The 60 rescue points, All Might explained, were not just for saving Uraraka from the zero-pointer, but for the dozen other subtle interventions he made, protecting other examinees from stray attacks and falling debris. Your actions embodied the very spirit of this institution. All Might concluded, his expression shifting to the more serious, thoughtful gaze of Toshinori Yagi. You demonstrated not only overwhelming power, but also the heart of a true hero. You balanced destruction with protection. We are proud to welcome you to the hero course. This is your hero academia. The hologram flickered and died, leaving Izuku in the quiet of his room. He looked at his hands, at the faint, silvery scars that were now a permanent part of him. He hadn't felt a sense of triumphant elation. Instead, a heavy, profound sense of responsibility settled over him. The exam had been the first test. He had unleashed his power in a controlled environment. But now, the real training would begin. The path to mastering the complex, warring instincts of the Weaver, the Berserker, and the King was a long and treacherous one. His mother, Inko, had cried tears of joy, hugging him so tightly he feared for his super-dense ribs. For her, it was the culmination of a 15-year-old dream she thought had died long ago. For Izuku, it was simply the next step on a tightrope walk over a chasm of his own potential. The first day at UA was a sensory ordeal. The school was a monument to heroic ambition, a sprawling campus teeming with thousands of students, each one a unique nexus of power. His heightened senses, even with his mental filters firmly in place, were bombarded. He could hear the crackle of an electricity quirk down the hall, smell the faint scent of sulfur from a boy with a minor explosive ability, and feel the subtle hum of the school's high-tech security systems in the walls. He navigated the labyrinthine hallways, his eyes scanning everything, his mind cataloging layouts and escape routes, a habit ingrained by 10 months of predatory training. He finally found the classroom, 1A. The door was absurdly large, built to accommodate students with gigantification or mutation quirks. Taking a calming breath, he slid the door open and stepped inside. He was met with a scene of immediate chaos. The blue-haired boy from the exam, Tenya Ida, was rigidly admonishing another student for having his feet on the desk. And the student with his feet on the desk was Katsuki Bakugo. Izuku's presence was a lit match in a room full of gasoline. The chatter died. Every eye turned to him. He could feel the weight of their gazes, a mixture of curiosity, awe, and apprehension. He was the record breaker, the kid who had single-handedly destroyed the zero-pointer. He was a myth before he'd even introduced himself, but one pair of eyes held none of that. Bakugo's head swiveled, and his crimson eyes widened, first in shock, then narrowing into slits of pure, unadulterated rage. The casual arrogance he'd worn just moments before evaporated, replaced by a thunderous fury. He shot to his feet, the legs of his chair screeching against the floor. Deku! He roared, his voice cracking like a whip. Izuku didn't flinch. He met Bakugo's glare with a calm, steady gaze. The old dynamic, the one where he would tremble and stammer apologies, was dead and buried under a mountain of scrap metal in Battle Center B. You son of a bitch! Bakugo snarled, stalking towards him, his palms already starting to smoke. Small, contained explosions popped in his hands like firecrackers. You had a quirk. This whole time, you had a quirk and you were laughing at me behind my back, weren't you? Letting me think you were some useless, worthless pebble while you were hiding this. The accusation hung in the air, thick and venomous. The other students watched, frozen, as the number 1 and number 2 ranked students from the entrance exam faced off on the first day. No, Kaken, Izuku said, his voice level. He chose his words carefully, speaking the truth as he knew it. My quirk was dormant. Latent. It manifested for the first time during the sludge villain incident. I never lied to you. For 15 years I was quirkless. Lies! Bakugo bellowed, lunging forward. He was a foot away, his hand raised, ready to blast Izuku's face into the wall. Izuku's hunter's instinct flared, a sharp, cold alarm in his mind. His body tensed, ready to move, to flow around the attack, to end the confrontation before it began. If you're here to make friends, then you should pack up and leave. A new voice, tired and utterly devoid of energy, cut through the tension. Everyone turned to the source. A man who looked like he just crawled out of a sleeping bag, which he was currently in, was lying on the floor behind the teacher's podium. He took a long slurp from a juice pouch before unzipping the yellow cocoon and rising to his feet. He had a weary, unkempt appearance, with dark, shaggy hair, a faint stubble, and eyes that looked like they hadn't seen a full night's sleep in a decade. It took you 8 seconds to quiet down, the man said, his voice a monotonous drone. That's not going to work. Time is a precious resource. You can't afford to waste it on pointless posturing. He scanned the room, his tired gaze lingering for a fraction of a second longer on Izuku and Bakugo. I'm Shota Aizawa, your homeroom teacher. The sheer, unimpressed aura he projected was enough to douse even Bakugo's fiery rage. Bakugo glared at Izuku one last time, a silent promise of future violence in his eyes, before stomping back to his seat. Right, Aizawa said, pulling a bundle of gym uniforms from his sleeping bag. Get into these. Meet me on the field. The P grounds were bathed in the morning sun. The 20 students of Class 1A stood in neat rows, confused and uncertain. A quirk assessment test? Achiko Uraraka, the kind-faced girl Izuku had saved, asked incredulously. But what about the entrance ceremony? Or orientation? UA's not like other schools, Aizawa said, his back to them. We have more freedom in how we run our classes. You've all been using your quirks in unregulated environments your whole lives. Here, you will learn control, limits, and applications under standardized testing. It's time to see what you're really made of. He turned, his eyes sweeping over the class. Bakugo, he said, tossing a softball to him. You got the highest score on the practical exam for villain points. What was your farthest throw in junior high? 67 meters. Bakugo grunted. Try it with your quirk, Aizawa instructed. Do whatever you want, as long as you stay in the circle. Bakugo stepped into the chalk circle, a wicked, confident grin spreading across his face. He stretched his arm, winding up. Die! He screamed, launching the ball with a massive, focused explosion. The ball became a comet, soaring through the air on a plume of smoke and fire, leaving a sonic boom in its wake. Aizawa held up a small device. It beeped. 705.2 meters, he announced. The class erupted in excited chatter. Wow! That's amazing! We get to use our quirks for real! This is gonna be so fun! Izuku remained silent, observing. He felt the shift in the air, the subtle change in Aizawa's posture. This wasn't about fun. This was a crucible. Fun? Aizawa's voice was dangerously low, a cold knife that sliced through the excitement. The temperature on the field seemed to drop several degrees. You think this is fun? You have 3 years here to become a hero. You think you'll be spending it having fun? Today, you will learn what it means to push your limits. He smiled, a chilling, predatory expression that didn't reach his eyes. And to make it interesting, the student who ranks last in total points will be judged as having no potential and will be expelled. Immediately, panic. Pure, unadulterated panic swept through the class. Expulsion on the first day? It was insane. It was cruel. It was, as Izuku realized with a cold certainty, the most logical way to weed out those who weren't completely serious. This was no longer a simple assessment. It was a test of survival. Test 1, 50-meter dash. Ida went first, his calf engines flaring to life, propelling him across the distance in 3.04 seconds. A frog-like girl, Tsuyu Ajui, used her powerful legs to cover the distance in a few long bounds. Uraraka used her quirk to lighten her clothes and shoes, clocking in a decent time. Izuku was paired against Bakugo. Bakugo shot him a look that was pure murder. As the starting pistol fired, he propelled himself forward with a series of controlled explosions, screaming, "Eat my dust, Deku!" Izuku's response was silent and instantaneous. He didn't run. He aimed his right web shooter at the finish line sensor post, his left at a point on the ground 10 meters ahead. Thwip. Thwip. He pulled. The dual lines created a slingshot effect, launching him forward with incredible velocity. He flew past the shocked Bakugo, a low green blur that barely touched the ground. He crossed the line, tucking into a roll to bleed off his momentum. Aizawa's device beeped. 2.89 seconds. Bakugo landed a second later, his face a mask of disbelief and incandescent fury. He had been beaten. Effortlessly. Test 2, grip strength. A boy with multiple arms, Mizo Shoji, recorded an impressive 540 kilograms. A muscular, rock-hard student named Eijiro Kurishima also scored high. Izuku stepped up to the machine. He took a breath, focusing not on raw strength, but on the principles of the weaver aspect. He gripped the handle, his fingers and palm adhering to the metal surface on a microscopic level, creating a perfect, unbreakable bond. He squeezed. The digital display climbed rapidly. 300. 400. 500. The machine began to groan, the metal creaking under the strain. Crunch. With a final, sharp crack, the handle deformed in his grip, and the machine's internal mechanism shattered. The display flickered wildly before going dark. Aizawa glanced at the last recorded number before it died. Error. Limit exceeded. The class stared in stunned silence. He hadn't just maxed it out. He had destroyed it. Test 3, standing long jump. Izuku cleared the entire sandbox with a single, powerful leap, landing silently on the grass on the other side. Weaver aspect. Simple. Test 4, repeated side steps. His agility was inhuman. He moved back and forth with a fluid, blurring speed that left the others looking like they were moving in slow motion. The only one who came close was a small, purple-haired boy who bounced off a set of sticky balls he created. Through each test, Izuku was a paradigm of quiet, devastating efficiency. He didn't showboat. He didn't yell. He analyzed the test, selected the most effective aspect of his quirk, and executed the task with surgical precision. He was an enigma. He wasn't loud and explosive like Bakugo. He wasn't cold and overwhelming like the boy with the ice and fire quirk, Shoto Todoroki, who had been watching him with a frigid, calculating intensity since the first test. He was just effective. His power was an undeniable, objective fact. Finally, it was time for the last test, the softball throw. Uraraka stepped up and touched the ball, making it weightless. She threw it, and it sailed up, and up, and up, disappearing into the sky. Aizawa's device eventually beeped, displaying a single, glowing symbol, infinity. Infinity. The class was in awe. How could anyone top that? It was Izuku's turn. He stepped into the circle, the softball feeling impossibly light in his hand. He could throw it with the weaver's strength, and probably get close to Bakugo's score. He could use a webline to launch it like a slingshot, but Aizawa's words echoed in his head. Push your limits. This was a chance to test the king aspect in a controlled way. A chance to show not just raw power, but controlled, overwhelming force. He took a deep breath. He remembered his training with all might. He bent his knees and stomped his right foot on the ground. Thud. He felt the kinetic energy of the impact travel up his leg, a warm, humming current that settled in his core. He stomped again with his left. Thud. The hum grew stronger. A faint, violet aura began to shimmer around his body, visible even in the bright sunlight. The other students took a subconscious step back. The energy radiating from him was palpable, a low thrum that made the hairs on their arms stand up. "What is he doing?" Kirishima muttered. "He's charging up?" A boy with a lightning quirk, Denki Kaminari, whispered. Todoroki's eyes, one gray and one turquoise, narrowed. He recognized the phenomenon. It was a form of energy absorption. A rare and incredibly powerful ability. This confirmed his suspicion. Midoriya was not just some powerhouse. He was a strategic threat. Izuku stomped a third, a fourth, and a fifth time. The ground beneath his feet began to crack. The violet aura around him was now a blazing corona of power, his green tracksuit looking dark against the brilliant light. He could feel the energy coiled inside him, a caged star begging for release. He drew his arm back, not with a pitcher's form, but like he was throwing a punch. He didn't just channel the energy into the ball. He channeled it through the ball. He threw. The moment the ball left his hand, he released the stored energy. There was no explosion of fire and smoke like Bakugo's. There was only a concussive boom that was felt more than it was heard, a shockwave of pure kinetic force that kicked up a massive cloud of dust and flattened the grass in a 10-meter radius around him. The ball itself vanished. It didn't fly. It was simply gone, propelled forward at such a velocity that it broke the sound barrier instantly and disappeared from sight. The class was thrown off balance by the shockwave. Aizawa, standing several dozen meters away, had to brace himself, his capture weapon scarf whipping around him. Silence. Everyone stared at the empty sky where the ball had been. Aizawa held up his device. He stared at it for a long, silent moment, his expression unreadable. Then, without a word, he turned the screen for the class to see. Like Uraraka's, it displayed the infinity symbol. But it was different. It was glowing a fierce, pulsing violet. 2 infinities in one class? Aizawa murmured, a flicker of something that might have been interest in his tired eyes. Unprecedented. Bakugo was shaking. Not with rage this time, but with something else. A tremor of inadequacy, of seeing a mountain rise up where there was once a valley. The boy he had tormented his entire life, the boy he had deemed less than worthless, was operating on a plane of existence he couldn't even comprehend. The final scores were projected onto a holographic screen. 1. Izuku Midoriya. 2. Shoto Todoroki. 3. Katsuki Bakugo. 4. Tenya Ida. 20. Minoru Mineta. The small, purple-haired boy let out a wail of despair, collapsing to the ground. By the way, Aizawa said, his voice dripping with tired nonchalance as he turned off the hologram. The expulsion thing was a lie. The class erupted in a mixture of relief and indignation. It was a logical deception, he continued, ignoring their outrage. Designed to make you push yourselves beyond what you thought you were capable of. To draw out your true potential. A girl with a black ponytail, Momo Yayorozu, nodded. Of course. I should have realized. A teacher would not be so cruel. Don't misunderstand me. Aizawa cut in, his eyes suddenly sharp and serious, fixing on the entire class. If I had deemed any of you to be truly without potential, I would have expelled you without a second thought. You were all just barely adequate. He turned to leave, then paused, his gaze falling on Izuku. He walked over, stopping in front of him. The other students held their breath. Midoriya, Aizawa said, his voice low, for Izuku's ears only. You have an incredible amount of power. More than anyone I've seen in a first year. Today, you demonstrated a measure of control, but I saw your file. I saw the footage from the sludge villain incident. Izuku's blood ran cold. Your power has a feral side. A berserker state. Aizawa continued, his eyes boring into Izuku's. That kind of power, the kind that overrides reason and intellect, is a liability. It's a weapon pointed at everyone around you, including yourself. You walk a razor's edge, kid. Don't ever forget that. He gave a curt nod. Don't disappoint me. With that, he walked away, leaving Izuku standing alone with the weight of his warning. The praise of his classmates, the shock on Bakugo's face, the number 1 ranking, it all faded away. Aizawa had seen past the spectacle. He had seen the beast lurking in the cage, and he had put Izuku on notice. The quiet enigma of Class 1A had a secret, and his teacher was already beginning to unravel it. The real test had just begun. The day after the Quirk assessment test, the atmosphere in Class 1A was a volatile cocktail of nervous energy, budding rivalries, and grudging respect. Izuku Midoriya was the epicenter of this storm. He walked into the classroom to a sudden lull in conversation, followed by a barrage of hushed whispers. He was no longer just a student. He was a phenomenon, a living benchmark against which everyone else was now measuring themselves. Kirishima, the red-haired boy with the hardening quirk, was the first to break the ice, approaching him with a wide, toothy grin. "Dude! Midoriya! That ball throw yesterday was insane! So manly! What kind of training did you do to get a power-up quirk like that?" "It's not really a power-up quirk," Izuku replied, choosing his words with care as he took his seat. "It's more like kinetic energy absorption and redirection." This only led to more questions from the students around him. Kaminari, the electric user, Siro, the boy who shot tape from his elbows, and Mina Ishido, the cheerful pink-skinned girl. He answered them politely but vaguely, the habit of secrecy ingrained in him by 10 months of clandestine training with all might. He was friendly, but there was a subtle wall around him, a quiet watchfulness that kept anyone from getting too close. He could feel 2 pairs of eyes on him, however, that were not filled with friendly curiosity. From across the room, Shoto Todoroki watched him with a cold, analytical stillness. It was the gaze of a chess master studying a powerful new piece on the board. There was no malice in it, only an unnerving intensity, a silent acknowledgement of Izuku as a significant obstacle on his own path to the top. The other gaze was pure, molten hatred. Katsuki Bakugo sat hunched in his seat, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of his desk. He hadn't said a word to Izuku, but the fury radiating from him was a physical force. It wasn't just about being surpassed. It was about the fundamental violation of his worldview. Deku, the definition of worthless, had been lying to him, hiding a god-tier quirk for 15 years. In Bakugo's mind, it was the ultimate betrayal, the most profound mockery. The fact that Izuku insisted it was a recent development only infuriated him further, as it implied that the universe itself had chosen to bless the one person he despised above all others. Their silent standoff was interrupted by a familiar, deafening boom. "I am here!" All Might declared, bursting into the classroom in a pose that was more contorted than heroic. "Coming through the door like a normal person," the class erupted. The presence of the number 1 hero in their classroom was enough to momentarily eclipse even the tension between his top students. All Might, in his shimmering Silver Age costume, was a living legend, and the sheer charisma he exuded was intoxicating. "Welcome to the most important class at UA High. Hero Basic Training," he announced, his voice a tidal wave of enthusiasm. "Today, we'll be jumping right in with this. Combat training." He gestured dramatically to a wall from which numbered cases began to slide out. "And to go with that, you need these, your very own hero costumes, designed based on your quirk registration forms and the requests you sent in before school started. Get changed and meet me at ground beta." A wave of pure excitement washed over the students as they scrambled to find their cases. Izuku found his, case 17. It was heavier than he expected. He felt a flicker of nervous anticipation. He had submitted a simple, practical design, but seeing it realized, tangible and real, was another step in making his impossible dream a reality. Ground Beta was a sprawling urban cityscape, a more detailed and realistic version of the entrance exam battle centers. One by one, the students of Class 1A emerged from the tunnel into the sunlight, each one a vibrant splash of color and personality, their costumes a physical manifestation of their quirks and identities. There was Ida in a full suit of knight-like armor with massive engines on his calves, Uraraka in a sleek, form-fitting pink and black spacesuit, Kirishima looking rugged with his bare chest and gear-like shoulder pads. Bakugo's costume was ostentatious and aggressive, with massive grenade-shaped gauntlets on his forearms and a black and orange color scheme that screamed danger. Then Izuku stepped out. His costume was a stark contrast to the others. It was devoid of flashy armor or bright colors. A dark, forest green bodysuit, made of the tear-resistant fabric he'd painstakingly sewn, hugged his lean, wiry frame. Black lines accented the powerful muscles of his legs, arms, and torso. A simple red utility belt held spare cartridges for his web shooters, which were now sleek and black, integrated seamlessly into his gloves. His face was covered by a full mask, the lower half a metal respirator-like guard, and the top dominated by two large, white, mirrored lenses. Long, rabbit ear-like protrusions extended from the top, a subtle, almost subconscious nod to All Might's iconic hair tufts. He looked less like a traditional hero and more like a nocturnal hunter, an urban predator. He was sleek, silent, and serious. "Whoa, Midoriya, cool costume! Looks super stealthy," Kirishima commented, giving him a thumbs up. "Thanks," Izuku replied, his voice slightly muffled by the mask. The lenses were a godsend, filtering the bright sunlight and providing a heads-up display that could analyze his surroundings, while also hiding his expressions and giving him an unnerving, unreadable appearance. "Young Midoriya, that is a fine, practical-looking outfit," All Might boomed, giving him an approving nod. He then launched into the explanation of the day's exercise. The scenario was a classic: heroes versus villains. The students would be split into pairs. One team, the villains, would be guarding a nuclear weapon prop hidden somewhere within a multi-story building. The other team, the heroes, would have to either capture the villains with special capture tape or secure the weapon within a time limit. "This is a battle of wits and strategy as much as power," All Might explained. "The villains have the advantage of preparation and knowledge of the terrain. The heroes have the element of surprise. Think like a pro. Consider your opponent's quirk, the environment, and your partnership." The teams were drawn by lottery. Izuku watched as the pairings were announced. Uraraka was paired with him. Good, he thought. Her quirk is excellent for mobility and object manipulation. A non-combat specialist. He looked up at the board to see who their opponents would be. Team D, Tenya Ida and Katsuki Bakugo. A cold, heavy silence fell over the group. It was fate. It was a declaration of war. All Might himself seemed to realize the explosive potential of this matchup, a flicker of concern crossing his face before he masked it with his heroic grin. Bakugo's head slowly turned to look at Izuku. A terrifying, predatory smile stretched across his face, a rictus of pure, joyous malice. This wasn't a training exercise for him. This was a hunt. This was an execution. "I'm gonna kill you, Deku," he mouthed silently, his crimson eyes burning with promise. Izuku met his gaze through the white lenses of his mask. He felt no fear. He felt no anger. The feral rage of the berserker aspect was a sleeping lion in its cage, and he had no intention of waking it. Instead, he felt a cold, sharp clarity. This wasn't a fight for him, either. It was a lesson. It was time to demonstrate the difference between a caged animal and an uncaged one. The mission: heroes versus villains. Heroes: Izuku Midoriya Achiko Uraraka. Villains: Katsuki Bakugo Tenya Ida. Izuku and Uraraka stood outside the target building, a 5-story concrete monolith with a complex interior layout displayed on a small holographic map provided by All Might. The timer on the wall began its 15-minute countdown. "Okay, Uraraka-san, let's make a plan," Izuku said, his voice calm and focused through his masked communicator. "Knowing Kaken Bakugo, he won't be guarding the objective. He's too aggressive and proud for a defensive role. He'll come straight for me. Ida, on the other hand, is pragmatic and follows rules. He'll be the one guarding the weapon. He'll likely have cleared the room of all debris to maximize his speed and prevent you from using your quirk on nearby objects." Uraraka looked at him, impressed by the rapid, confident analysis. "Wow, you've really thought this through. So, what's the plan?" "Simple. We don't play their game. We play ours," Izuku replied. He pointed to a 3rd-story window. "We'll make a stealthy entrance there. I need you to focus entirely on the objective. Your mission is to find and secure the weapon. My mission is to keep you safe." "But what about Bakugo-kun?" she asked, a note of worry in her voice. "You'll be facing him alone." Izuku turned, the white lenses of his mask seeming to glow with an inner resolve. "Don't worry about Kaken," he said, a strange, almost pitying note in his voice. "He won't be a problem." Inside the building on the 5th floor, Ida was meticulously arranging the room, removing every last piece of furniture as Izuku had predicted. "Bakugo-kun, we should formulate a strategy. Midoriya-kun is clearly a high-mobility fighter with an unknown but powerful quirk. We should work together to corner him. Shut up, Four Eyes! Bakugo snarled, cracking his knuckles. He was pacing back and forth like a caged tiger. The only one you need to worry about is the floaty girl. Deku is mine. I'm gonna beat him so bad he'll forget he ever even had a quirk. I'll make him remember his place. The rage in him was a physical thing, a furnace that burned away all reason and strategy. All he could see was Izuku's calm, pitying face from the classroom, the effortless way he'd been surpassed in the assessment test. It was a personal insult that demanded a violent, overwhelming response. Hero team, begin! All Might's voice echoed through their earpieces. Outside, Izuku didn't hesitate. He shot a web line to the third-story window ledge. Hold on tight, he said to Uraraka. She wrapped her arms around his neck, and with a powerful tug, he reeled them both upward, crashing through the window in a shower of glass. They landed in a silent row, immediately pressing themselves against a wall in the darkened hallway. Okay, you have the building schematics in your earpiece, Izuku whispered. Ida will likely be on one of the upper floors. Stay low, stay quiet. Use your quirk to make yourself lighter to muffle your footsteps. Go. Uraraka nodded, her expression determined. She touched her own suit, a faint pink aura surrounding her, and then moved down the hallway with an eerie, floating silence. Izuku remained where he was, perfectly still. He closed his eyes, filtering out the ambient noise of the building, the hum of the fluorescent lights, the distant city sounds. He focused his senses, reaching out with the berserker's heightened hearing. He heard Uraraka's near-silent footsteps moving away. He heard the faint, high-pitched whir of Ida's engines as he patrolled the 5th floor, and then he heard it. A floor below him. The heavy, angry stomp of combat boots. The faint, sizzling pop of nitroglycerin sweat igniting. He was coming. Izuku opened his eyes. A cold, analytical calm settled over him. He wasn't afraid. He was a scientist about to conduct an experiment. The hypothesis, controlled, tactical application of power would always triumph over raw, unfocused rage. He stepped out into the middle of the hallway, waiting. The silence was broken by a deafening boom. A massive explosion blew a hole in the floor at the far end of the corridor, and Bakugo rocketed up through it, landing in a crouch, a maniacal grin on his face. Found you, Deku! He roared, his voice echoing in the enclosed space. There's nowhere to run! I'm not running, Kakin! Izuku replied, his voice flat and emotionless through the mask. That calm, that lack of fear, was the final spark. Bakugo screamed in fury and launched himself down the hallway. His hands lit up like jet engines. I'll wipe that calm look right off your face! Izuku's hunter's instinct flared, a cool, precise alarm. The world slowed to a crawl. He saw every detail of Bakugo's attack, the angle of his trajectory, the subtle shift in his shoulders that indicated he was aiming his right gauntlet, the buildup of sweat in his palm. It was sloppy. It was predictable. Just as Bakugo was about to unleash his blast, Izuku fired a webline at the ceiling. He swung up and over the attack, the explosion searing the spot where he had just been standing. He landed silently behind Bakugo, who skidded to a halt, whirling around in disbelief. Stop dodging and fight me! Bakugo screamed, firing another blast. Izuku was already moving, flowing. He ran along the wall, his feet sticking to the plaster, easily evading the attack. He didn't throw a punch. He didn't extend his claws. He just moved. He fired 2 weblines, not at Bakugo, but at 2 large pieces of debris from the hole Bakugo had made. He yanked them into the air, causing them to crash together in front of Bakugo, creating a temporary barrier and a cloud of dust. By the time Bakugo blasted through the rubble, Izuku was gone. Coward! Show yourself, DKU, I'm right here, Izuku's voice said, seemingly from everywhere at once. Bakugo spun around, trying to locate him in the dimly lit corridor. Izuku was clinging to the ceiling directly above him, perfectly silent, a spider waiting in its web. He dropped down, not to attack, but to land lightly on the other side of Bakugo, putting more distance between them. The game of cat and mouse continued. Bakugo would attack, a wild, furious flurry of explosions that shook the building to its foundations, and Izuku would evade, using his webs and his impossible agility to make Bakugo look like he was fighting a ghost. In the monitor room, the other students watched in stunned silence. What is Midoriya doing? Kirishima asked, confused. He hasn't even tried to fight back. He's just running away. No, he's not, a quiet voice said. It was Momo Yaoyorozu. Her eyes were wide with analytical admiration. He's not running. He's controlling the engagement. Look, Bakugo is moving deeper and deeper into the building, away from the objective. Midoriya is luring him, tiring him out, and making him waste his power. It's brilliant, All Might watched, a bead of sweat trickling down his temple. He knew exactly what Izuku was doing. It was a lesson from one of their sparring sessions. Never fight your opponent's fight, young Midoriya. If they are a brawler, be an acrobat. If they are a cannon, be a shadow. Dictate the terms of the battle, and you will always have the advantage. Izuku was doing more than just following the lesson. He was perfecting it. Bakugo was panting, his arms starting to ache. The constant, high-output explosions were taking their toll. His frustration was mounting, turning his rage from a sharp flame into a blunt, clumsy instrument. I've had enough of this, he roared. He raised his left gauntlet, pulling a small pin from the side. You know what these are for, Deku. They're not just for show. They store my nitro sweat, letting me create one massive, focused blast. In his earpiece, All Might's frantic voice shouted. Young Bakugo, don't! You'll kill him! He won't die if he dodges! Bakugo screamed back, aiming the gauntlet. Izuku stood at the end of a long hallway, a dead end. He hadn't run out of room. He had chosen this spot. His hunter's instinct wasn't screaming in alarm. It was a low, steady hum. It knew what was coming, and it knew he could handle it. He braced himself, planting his feet firmly on the ground. He began to stomp. Thud. Thud. The violet aura of the king aspect began to shimmer around him. Bakugo grinned maniacally. Nowhere to run! Now die! He pulled the trigger. A colossal, building-width explosion erupted from the gauntlet. A tidal wave of fire and concussive force that tore down the hallway, ripping chunks of concrete from the walls and ceiling. The students in the monitor room gasped in horror. All Might gripped his console, his knuckles white. The explosion engulfed Izuku completely. For a moment, there was only fire and thunder. When the smoke cleared, the hallway was a ruined, blackened chasm. And at the end of it, Izuku was still standing. His costume was singed, and he was breathing heavily, but he was unharmed. He stood in a slight crouch, his arms crossed in front of his face. The violet aura around him was blazing, a furious, crackling shield of pure energy. He had absorbed the full kinetic force of the blast. He slowly lowered his arms, the white lenses of his mask seeming to stare into Bakugo's very soul. Bakugo was frozen, his mind unable to process what he was seeing. He had hit him with everything he had. It should have been a kill shot. And the nerd, he had just eaten it. Is that all you've got, Kakin? Izuku asked, his voice a low, dangerous rumble, amplified by the energy crackling around him. He took a single, deliberate step forward, the floor cracking under his foot. For the first time in his entire life, Katsuki Bakugo felt a sliver of genuine fear. Izuku didn't charge. He didn't power up for a return blast. Instead, he did something far more devastating. He let the energy dissipate, the violet aura fading back into nothingness. He stood there, unarmed, unpowered, completely vulnerable. He was making a statement. I don't even need my power to beat you. That was the ultimate insult. That broke Bakugo completely. With a scream that was more animal than human, he launched himself forward, his other gauntlet spent, relying on his own two hands. Izuku moved. He flowed around Bakugo's wild right hook, redirecting his momentum. He ducked under a left swing, his hand shooting out to grip Bakugo's arm. He twisted, using Bakugo's own forward momentum to slam him face first into the concrete wall. Before Bakugo could recover, Izuku was a blur of motion. He shot a rapid-fire volley of web lines, not the thick, strong kind for swinging, but thin, gossamer strands that layered over each other with incredible speed. In seconds, Bakugo was pinned to the wall, his arms and legs completely immobilized in a thick, sticky cocoon of webbing. He was helpless. He struggled, roaring with impotent rage, but the webbing was too strong, too thick. He couldn't even generate an explosion. Izuku stood before him, his mask just inches from Bakugo's face. It's over, he said simply. He tapped his earpiece. Uraraka-san status? I found it, her cheerful voice replied. Ida-kun is fast, but he didn't expect me to make the weapon itself float. I've secured it, H-Hero team. Why-ins? All Might's voice, thick with shock and relief, announced over the speakers. The battle was over. Izuku had not thrown a single punch. He had not extended his claws. He had not fired a single offensive blast. He had won through control, strategy, and an absolute refusal to be drawn into his opponent's rage. He had completely and utterly dominated Katsuki Bakugo without ever truly fighting him. He turned and walked away from the struggling, screaming figure webbed to the wall, leaving Bakugo alone with the ruins of the hallway and the complete and utter demolition of his own superiority. It was a wound far deeper than any physical blow could have ever inflicted.